Hey, this is Supernova reading through How Do We Know the Bible is True, Volume 1, edited by Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge. And I am an atheist giving you an atheist perspective on this Christian book. It has 28 chapters, and after this video, we will be halfway through this book because we're on chapter 14, Polygamy in Light of Scripture. This chapter is written by Roger Patterson, who has a BS in education and biology, which seems a little bit ironic. A lot of these guys from Answers of Genesis Foundation that put out this book, they teach creation, and I'm certain they didn't learn that in school, even though they went to school for exactly that topic. Let's begin. The Bible is an incredibly candid book when compared to the religious writings of other traditions. Rather than covering up the faults and flaws of its key figures, the Bible frequently shows us humanity and its deepest sin. I think this author, along with many of the authors in this book, are being deliberately obtuse, misunderstanding things that are obvious to anybody trying to comprehend them. The Bible is not different from religious writings of other traditions. Other holy books do the exact same thing. They don't write the faults and flaws of their gods, just like the Bible doesn't. It shows us the flaws of people who disobey those gods, and then shows us their downfall in order to give us a moral tale about why you shouldn't disobey their gods. Obviously. A prime example of this is the transparent treatment of David's adulterous relationship with Bathsheba and his murder of Uriah. These sinful actions had real consequences from which we can draw lessons, and David's repentance gives us a model to follow when we fall into sin. No, they didn't have real consequences. King David saw this woman out bathing, decided that he was going to sleep with her, even though she was married and he was married. And then David had the woman's husband sent to the front line so that he could be murdered. And so he committed adultery and murder, both of which, according to the Old Testament, should carry the death penalty. And he didn't get the death penalty for either of them. Whatever you think his sinful actions, the real consequences of them were, it wasn't the consequences that he should have received. Likewise, the Bible records many instances of polygamy in the Old Testament involving even some of the patriarchs of Israel. I think that's interesting, the biased view of polygamy they give us right up front. They're saying polygamy is recorded in order to show you the faults and flaws of key figures. We haven't been shown any evidence of that. This is heavily biased, and it has to be, because an objective view of the scripture is not going to give us the view that polygamy is wrong. Though our common usage of polygamy tends to be applied to a man with multiple wives, because that is by far the most common. The word polygamy simply means multiple spouses. More accurately, polygyny would be one man with multiple wives, while polyandry would be one woman with multiple husbands. More recently, those who live in communities of open relationships have been called polyamorous, having multiple husbands, wives, boyfriends, and girlfriends in various arrangements. As we look at Scripture, none of these arrangement matches the structure of marriage given by God from the beginning. Polygyny, one man with multiple wives, does. We'll see plenty of examples of that. The first marriage, we have Genesis 2:18 through 25 written out entirely here. I'm not going to read it. I'll give you a summation. It starts with, the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper comparable to him. Then while Adam's sleeping, God takes a rib out of him and makes Eve from him. And at the end it says, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. I don't know why it records that Eve was Adam's wife, because they didn't have a marriage ceremony. There wasn't anybody for either of them to cheat on. There's nothing married about them except they had sex, and only with each other. It doesn't seem like anything more than cohabitation. I don't know why. Maybe the writer of this section just didn't understand. He couldn't put himself in their shoes and say, oh, of course they wouldn't be married. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't look like any marriage we see. But it does call them married, at least in that last verse. Let's look closely at this passage and note several key phrases that indicate God's intent for marriage to be monogamous, one man for one woman. First, God intended to make a helper for Adam, not several helpers. Second, from one rib, God made one woman for Adam. Genesis 2:24 reveals the pattern of a man leaving his family to be joined to his wife, not wives. This union is then described as becoming one flesh. Actually, the union here we see is one flesh becoming two people. If you take a rib out of Adam and make another person, they're no longer one flesh, even though they used to be. And we don't see an example of a man leaving his father and mother, even though it does say that in verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That's not what happened in this case. So this is just saying that that's what marriage looks like, but it doesn't actually demonstrate it. Now, this whole passage, and in fact the whole argument being made here, commits the naturalistic fallacy, or also known as the status quo fallacy. It suggests that what is what ought to be, deriving an ought from an is. It says that just because God made a man and a woman, that's the way he intended it. Well, he also put them in a garden. So does that mean living in a city is sinful because it's not the way that it originally was? Does it mean that you shouldn't have kids because he didn't set them up originally with kids? Obviously not. There are so many examples of things that are different between now and then that you obviously can't derive what ought to be from what is. Jesus confirmed this understanding of marriage when he was asked about divorce by Pharisees, and he quoted from Genesis 2, confirming that his understanding of marriage was one man for one woman. Divorce and polygamy were regulated in the laws given to Moses, but polygamy was recorded long before then. This section, Polygamy and the Bible. The first reference to polygamy is found in Genesis 4 in the lineage of Cain. Of Lamech, a descendant of Cain, we read, Then Lamech took for himself two wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And I'll skip down a bit. Then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Before the flood, we have a clear distortion of what God had intended for marriage. Clearly, because these wives didn't come from Lamech's ribs. Again, just because it's not identical to the original Adam and Eve story doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's not a distortion. That's such a biased word. It's just a different story. To compound Lamech's sin, he brags of his murderous deeds. The flood was brought upon the earth to judge the sinfulness of mankind, including the sins committed by Lamech. How convenient. It's almost like this writer is blaming the flood on Lamech being a polygamist, even though the flood lists two reasons for why it happened. The first one, women having sex with angels, and the second was that people were being violent. It doesn't mention polygamy. And Lamech was violent. He killed a man. And it seems like a little unscientific. What science is, the scientific method, you take two groups, the control group and the experimental group, and you change one thing between them that we call the variable. And if there's a difference in effect between those two groups over time, it is because of the variable, because it's literally the only thing that you could blame a difference on. If something happens to one group and doesn't happen to the other group, it can only be because of something different between the two. And so science doesn't work with two variables. How can you draw, if Lamech was polygamous and a murderer, how can you draw the consequences from one and not the other? It just doesn't make sense. And especially in this case, we actually have a described reason for the flood. We know it's not because of Lamech's polygamy. Obtuse. After the flood, there are many mentions of polygamous relationships, including among the patriarchs of Israel. Abraham, Jacob, David, and Solomon all had multiple wives. It is interesting to note that there are no passages in Scripture that clearly state no man should have more than one wife. It's not just interesting, it's the relevant evidence here. If the Bible doesn't say that it's wrong, it's not wrong. However, polygamous relationships are never mentioned in a positive light, and indeed the problems of such relationships are presented. And he's going to present them. He's going to list the examples he gave, Abraham, Jacob, David, and Solomon. Why doesn't he list Lamech there? Why did he go write this? After the flood, there are many mentions of polygamous relationships. Why not say, even before the flood, there was an example of a polygamous relationship? Because the Bible doesn't say that anything happened bad to Lamech himself directly. I mean, you could say the flood did, but obviously that wasn't just because of him. And so I think the writer, knowing that, probably in his first draft listing them among them, couldn't find anything in the Bible to support his case, and so he's like, we'll kind of segregate Lamech just a bit so I don't even have to make it look like I didn't come up with anything. Consider the consequences revealed in Scripture in each of the following cases. Abraham led to bitterness between Sarah and her maid Hagar and the eventual dismissal of Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar, as he just said, was Sarah's maid. She was Abraham's concubine, which means she was just around to give Abraham children, not a wife. I'm pretty sure that he never married Hagar, so this isn't even an example of polygamy. But even if it were, that's just silly consequence. Led to bitterness between Sarah and Hagar. So they were jealous of each other? I mean, that seems like a pretty natural consequence of polygamy, but is that enough to argue against it? Jacob led to Rachel's jealousy of Leah and to Joseph being betrayed and sold by his half-brothers. Again, we're told Rachel was jealous of Leah, and the Bible says exactly that, and they tried to outcompete each other for having children to gain favor of their husband. Again, jealousy being told of as the consequence. There wasn't any consequence to the jealousy. That is it. Like, it's such a big thing. Then we are told that Joseph was betrayed and sold by his half-brothers. As a result of polygamy? No, because they were jealous of him. Jacob's favorite son was obviously Joseph. If you've ever heard the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jacob gives Joseph this special coat that all his brothers are jealous of, and so they sell him into slavery. That was sibling rivalry. That was the natural jealousy found among children. If you think that jealousy being a consequence is enough to condemn an action, then by Roger Patterson, author of this chapter, by his standards, you shouldn't have multiple children because the consequence is jealousy. I don't think he agrees with that. I think he's reverse engineering, trying to find evidence to support his point of view, not drawing his point of view from the evidence. David led to the rape of one of his daughters, Tamar, by one of his sons, Tamar's half-brother Amnon, and Amnon's subsequent murder by Tamar's brother Absalom. Again, sibling rivalry. It has nothing to do with polygamy. Solomon, his many wives turned away his heart from the Lord and to the worship of false gods. Finally, this seems like a good example, but logically it's not. Yes, Solomon followed false gods because his wives did, but if he had one wife who followed a false god, it's quite likely that that also would have caused him to worship a false god. It had nothing to do with having multiple wives. It had to do with the religions of his wives. Just because the Bible records polygamous relationships does not mean that God approves of such a thing. That's true, and I'm glad that nobody's making that argument. The only direct command against polygamy is given to the kings that were to rule Israel, as they were told not to multiply wives to themselves. It's also interesting to note, again, that word when he's presenting evidence against his point, to note that polygamous relationships seem to be regulated in the commands Moses gave to the nation of Israel. Leviticus 18:18 instructs that a man should not marry sisters, and Deuteronomy 21:15 talks of assigning an heir to a man with two wives. Many commentators suggest that the passages do not endorse polygamy, but rather prohibit it, and then he gives his reasons. Regardless of the interpretation of these passages, the taking of multiple wives is not in accord with God's design from the beginning. So he's saying, regardless of the interpretation of these passages, even if you see these as evidence again that God understood polygamy and wanted to regulate it because he saw it as a natural thing, something that he was okay with, it's not in accord with God's design from the beginning, going back to his naturalistic fallacy. It's like implying that while it can't contradict the points that I've already made. Silly, just so illogical. Moving to the New Testament, there are several passages that can be understood to speak against polygamous relationships. And I'm going to grant him this. I'm not going to read them, but in several of the Apostle Paul's letters, he writes that marriage is one man and one wife, and he never talks about polygamous relationships, and his passages don't really make sense in that context. Now, having said all that, in the New Testament, we don't have any commands against polygamy either. Just like in the Old Testament. The Old Testament has Deuteronomy and Leviticus talking about people with multiple wives, and you would think that is the perfect opportunity to throw in commands against polygamy. After all, Deuteronomy goes on and on about you shouldn't have sex with your mother or your uncle or with another man or with an animal. Why not say, and don't marry multiple wives? Why not? I think the silence of the Bible speaks volumes in this case. If, for instance, Paul wanted to say you should not marry more than one person, he would have explicitly said that. I think the commandments in the Old Testament would have done the same. I think they don't because God didn't have a problem with polygamy. Next section, polygamy and other religions. Both the Muslim and Mormon faiths endorse polygamy, and it's really not relevant because they go by different holy books, the Quran and the Book of Mormon respectively, and so they're going by different standards. Why would they care what the Bible has to say on polygamy? The Bible makes it clear that he intends marriage to be between one man and one woman in conclusion. Any challenge to this teaching stands in opposition to God's plan for his creation. It clearly doesn't. This was not only a short chapter, but a very weak argument. He just didn't have anything. He was trying to manufacture an argument from a book that didn't support his opinion. It seems that in the future, if polygamy becomes legal in all the states, and I think that it probably will, I think that Christians will look back on chapters like this and say, no, that's not what we believe. It's never what we believe. Just like they did with interracial marriage. If you look at Loving versus Virginia, the 1967 case which made interracial marriage legal in all the states, you'll see that the trial judge that originally shot down the case gave an argument for it, again making the naturalistic fallacy, saying that all peoples are separated by continents and languages in Genesis, and thus that must be what God had originally intended. And I don't see Christians making that argument today because they've accepted interracial marriage and they try to pretend that they were never against it. And the same thing with gay marriage. We see more and more Christians coming on board with that and denying that they ever had a problem with it, denying that the Bible is against it, even though I think that is a little more explicit of a case of the Bible being against it. And so as attitudes shift, I think you'll see that Christians will deny that they ever made these arguments. Now, what should we as skeptics, as non-believers, think about polygamy? I personally have no problem with it. I think that by the same standards of interracial marriage and gay marriage, we should also accept polygamy. Just more freedoms whenever we can, whenever they don't cause harm to other people, and polygamy doesn't. I think all the arguments that can be made for gay marriage could also be made for polygamy. I don't have a problem with it. Now, that said, there are certain people in the population who might have a logical problem against it, and that would include myself. Because polygamy tends to be with a man and multiple wives, and it tends to be with the best men. The richest and best looking are the ones that can attract multiple wives. And because of that, if you were to look at all the men and all the women and say people pair basically with their best mates, the ones right across from them, the ones that are just as genetically suited, just as attractive, just as financially well off as themselves. Some people marry up and some people marry down, but we generally find pairs who are very much like us. But in the case of a society that accepts polygamy, we have men taking several women out of the pool, and thus less competition for men among women and more competition among men to get women because there are fewer of them. Not everybody can get one if there are men taking, and not only that, generally we have to marry down as men in that case because women can marry up. They can marry men that already have wives that are way up there, and so this tends to cause a bit of a problem for men, which causes the non-intuitive result that men tend to be more against polygamy than women are. But again, if you accept this argument, I would invite you to look up marriage squeeze, one of the results of interracial marriage. In fact, I will include a link to it below. I think it's very interesting to read up on if you're not familiar with it. Anyway, that is chapter 14. In the next chapter, I will go on to Evolution and the Challenge of Morality, written by Jason Leisel. I've said nice things about him in the past, but he totally bombs on the front of logic in this chapter. But anyway, I hope you will enjoy me for the next video. Subscribe, comment, you know all of it. Till next time, peace out.